Hi everyone, my name is Courtney, and today I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of my physical and my digital TBR pile. I wouldn't say I'm a super big mood reader, but I like having a small pile of books physically and then a list that I can buy from when I want to read certain books. I find it's a lot more manageable, it makes me feel a lot more at ease, and it's just how I like to have a TBR pile. So let's go over the books that I physically own right now and kind of what I will be reading in the next couple months. And then we can get into my Notion TBR, and then we can just kind of have an overview of that. So currently I am reading Legendborn. I'm 25 of the way through this, so I will be talking about this very soon. And as for the rest of my TBR, this is pretty much it. I have a couple books that are still in boxes because I just moved. I think one of them is Yoke by H.K. Choi. There might be one other book on that stack, but really this is it. So let's get into what I have. I have 2 Octavia Butler books because I'm working on an Octavia Butler video. I have Dawn and I have Kindred. I just finished Parable of the Sower, so that's no longer on my TBR. All of those books are sci-fi, speculative, pretty much classic 70s, 80s, 90s stuff. And yeah, again, talk about it more later. We don't need to go in depth for every book. And then as far as the other things that I have, all books that I want to read very, very soon. I have Redemptor, which is the second book in the Raybearer series, which is a young adult fantasy series. And then I have Bonds of Brass, which is an adult male sci-fi novel. I have A Close and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers, which is the second book in the Wayfarer series. And then I have one thing that was kind of a surprise for my TBR, which was The Best in American Science Fiction and Fantasy. And this is a 2020 short story collection, bind-up anthology kind of thing of a bunch of sci-fi fantasy stories that came out in 2020. I basically know nothing about this. I saw it on sale at the bookstore and I was like, this is a perfect way to get a taste of different kinds of authors, to, hone my craft, that kind of stuff, by reading things that I enjoy and things that I would want to possibly write myself. This was a surprise, but everything else I've had on my Notion TBR, I've been much anticipating it, and then for one reason or another, I pick it up in the bookstore. And that's what I love about having like a small TBR. Like, books at the bookstore can surprise me. I can put them on my list, or I can buy them right away and I won't feel too pressured about doing that. But for the most part, I can go into a bookstore knowing kind of what I'm looking for, what kind of books I'm interested in, and I can kind of be selective about the books that I want to read. It helps me stay organized, it helps me not buy willy-nilly, it helps me from getting flustered. I just really appreciate having the digital TBR pile versus a physical TBR pile. I can remove things, I can add things, it's just a lot easier for me personally to deal with. Okay, so I have my screen recording so I can kind of go in and show you. So this is my Notion. So I want to say I picked up Notion around January or February of this year. I picked it up exclusively to help me organize and stay on top of my thesis. I added stuff that was just to like my personal life and like stuff for YouTube. As you can see, I have a bunch of different like things that I use it for. Don't worry about the chore chart, that is from my old apartment. It's not this one, so it looks bad, but I promise I have been cleaning that apartment and this one. But anyway, I've been using it for a bunch of different things to help me stay organized and to track like the videos I'm making, the meals I'm planning, all of that kind of stuff. I've been on and off Notion, to be honest. Once my thesis was completed, I had a hard time like staying on top of those kind of things, but I use it as needed and I want to get more into it. One, to understand it better, but also because it does keep me very productive. But don't ask me any Notion questions. I do not know the answer. I learned it through YouTube, through online sources. I've basically forgotten a lot of stuff, honestly, but there are tons of videos on YouTube that tell you and show you how to use Notion. But let's go into the reading list. So I have 2 reading lists. I have my TBR, which is the digital TBR, and then I have the books I own, which are pretty much just what I just talked about. And as you can see, my Notion is all Studio Ghibli themed. Most of my writing stuff, book stuff, is specifically Whispers of the Heart, which is about a middle schooler who wants to be an author. It's one of my favorite Ghibli movies. Highly recommend it. So one thing that I really like about Notion is that you can have different views for the different pages. This especially works really well with my TBR pile. As you can see, this is like the gallery view, so you can just see like all the books, the covers. You can pick out something if you're looking for a specific cover, which is sometimes, what I need to do. You can just kind of scroll down and go through all the books. And I have a lot of books. which is why it's a little slow loading today. But let us go to the default view, which is honestly the one that I probably use more. The gallery view is helpful if I'm looking for something specific, but the default view gives me like a better look at my TBR, and it also keeps it in the specific order that I placed it in. So as you can see, there's like different categories that you can make. Like I decided which categories I wanted and how I wanted this to look, but you make all these kind of templates sheets yourself, or you use somebody else's template. So this is specifically catered to what I want my TBR to look like. So I have the titles of the books, I have the author names, I have my tags, which I'll go into a little bit later. I have pub dates, which we'll see why that's important at the end of this list. I have the covers, which I really just uploaded JPEGs of each book cover, which makes it aesthetic, makes it pleasing to the eye. And then I just have some notes, normally just specifying certain things. I would say the most helpful aspect is the tags and the notes section for me, because tags make it really, really easy to be like, okay, Diary of Blood, it is a published book already, it is queer, it's speculative, and it's adult. So that tells me all I need to know about the book. And then we go into my notes, and normally I will be a little more specific about like how it's LGBT. If it's BIPOC, I will be more specific in how it is BIPOC. And if I don't know, or if the author or the book doesn't say, then I'll just put something more broad. We go down to Dark Tides, it says it's sapphic. We look at Tasha Hart's Tolstoy, and it says it's Arrow Ace. It really helps me to find the book that I'm looking for. And the way it becomes really important or really useful is I can be like, oh, I want to read queer books. Okay, it'll give me all the books that have that queer tag or that have the queer in the notes, and then say like, oh, I want to read something with Black representation, or I'm looking for, you know, that specific book that has Black representation that I can't remember the title of, and then, oh, yeah, okay, this is the list and this is what I have to work with. And that's why I like having the tags and the notes section, because the tags are more broad and I apply them more loosely, whereas the notes are a little more specific. So if I'm looking for something that is under the tags, I can easily type that in, but if I want something more specific, I can easily type in the specific note that I'm looking for that I know I put in. So what does my TBR look like? Really diverse. I like to read a lot of different genres, a lot of different age categories, so my TBR is pretty wide-ranging in what I like. I tried to organize it by certain types. We start off with a lot of my YA contemporary stuff, mostly queer, and then farther down we get into the more speculative stuff. There's a couple adult titles in here, more adult fantasy, and honestly the list goes on. It's a bunch of queer stuff, contemporary, adult, young adult. It's just a whole range of different things, which is what I love about my TBR. Literally, I go on here, I look at the books that I have on my TBR. You know, I'm always curating this list, I'm always adding to it, deleting stuff, but even though I have 200 books on here, I am still really excited for everything that I have on here. And I like that I've curated my list so that there's so many different genres, so many different types of books here. That keeps me engaged in my reading, and it keeps me wanting to pick up new books because there's always something new and different. I will admit that some of these books have been books that I've wanted to read for a very, very long time, but like they're still on here for a reason. But yes, now we're getting down to the lower half of my list, the end of my list, and why the publishing date thing is important comes in. For the end of my list, I have all the 2021 releases that I have been anticipating or looking forward to. Most of these are for the earlier half of the year, which means they're just books that I haven't gotten to yet that I want to. I personally haven't done a good job of looking up what's coming out in the last 4 months of the year, so my list kind of ends up September, but I need to get back on that if I want to have a better list. But these have been all the releases that I haven't read that I'm looking forward to, and I like having the date just to know like when they're coming out if I wanted to get them that day, but also it helps me think about, oh, do I want to do reviews for any of these? Do I want to go back and read these before the end of the year so I can talk about them or make a video about them? So what happens when I buy a book or when I read a book? They get taken off the list. So I have releases that I have read, they've been since deleted. This is my digital TBR pile. Once it enters the physical TBR pile, it doesn't need to be on the list anymore, which keeps the list from being super clogged up with irrelevant things. I've used spreadsheets, I've used Word documents, I've used Pinterest boards, I've used everything to curate and remember the books on my TBR. I would say for the most part there's books on here that have been on my list for a while that like I can remember that I want to read them. For instance, I'm looking at Middle Game right here, definitely want to read that. But if I hear something in somebody else's YouTube video, if I see something on Bookstagram, it's really easy to just add it to the list and then go back and put in the information that I need so that I can curate the list. And so I don't really get overwhelmed in the bookstore because I can be like, oh yeah, I had, say for instance, horror on my reading list. I remember wanting to read that. It's okay to pick that up because I have it to the list. Of course, there are times when I'll pick something that is not on the list, but for the most part, this is really what I want to read, and I think it's a really solid list. For the most part, a lot of these I've heard a lot about or I've looked them up. Always on these kind of lists, there's a few things that hop on this list that maybe if I did more research, I wouldn't want to read them. But I think it's fine because it's in the digital space. I can easily delete and add stuff, which is why I really like this list. And again, it's just really easy because I can be like, oh, I want a nonfiction, oh, I want an adult fantasy book. I can instantly put in that, my notes will come up or the tags will come up, and I will easily get a couple books that I'm like, okay, these are the ones on my TBR. Of these, which do I want to read? Or it's just like a good reminder, like, oh yeah, I have this book on my list, I want to read that, I'm in the mood for that. But yeah, there's not really much else to say about that unless I wanted to get in and list all of the titles on this list, which again, there are 200, so I don't think that's really necessary. But I would say about 70 to 80% of the books on my list are all queer, and the other chunk of that is like nonfiction, a couple fantasy stragglers, and BIPOC books that have interested me. But yeah, I think that's gonna do it for this video. This was really fun to get to show you guys what my TBR looks like, how I manage my digital list. Like I said before, I have used mostly Word document, I've used spreadsheets, Google Docs, Pinterest, I've used everything. And I wouldn't say like Notion is better one way or the other. This is actually probably more time consuming to make, but it looks really nice and it is really organized, and it really does help me because I can easily look up the list on my phone, whereas some of these other lists like are a little bit more difficult and I don't stay on top of them as much. I think the real game changer with Notion is being able to put the photo in, just because it helps me to remember why I put this book on the list and like what book it is, whereas having like just a long list of titles, it's hard to remember if I want to keep a book on a list or not, and I have to normally do a little bit more research to do that kind of thing. But I think that's going to do it. That is my physical and digital TBR piles. That is what it looks like, and I am really excited to read all of these books in the future, but especially the physical TBR list in the next coming months. So I would love to know how you organize your TBR pile. Are you someone that likes digital list? Do you like to have just a giant TBR stack? Do you buy willy-nilly on a whim? How do you do it? Are you super anal and organized like I am? I'd love to know. But thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys later, and happy reading.